The massive crystalline lecture hall hummed with soft blue light as Professor Vextara floated to her teaching podium. Her four arms moved gracefully across the holographic control panel, each gesture precise and practiced. Around her, 12 alien students from different worlds settled into their bioadaptive seats, their various forms creating a colorful display of galactic diversity. The Zentari student adjusted his breathing apparatus, his gill slits opening and closing rhythmically, as he prepared for another boring lecture. Beside him, a crystalline being from Zerion Prime dimmed her natural glow to avoid disturbing others. In the back row, 3 insectoid Zephyrians clustered together, their antennae twitching with shared thoughts through their hive-mind connection. Professor Vextara's voice carried the tone of someone who had given this same lecture hundreds of times before. She was considered one of the galaxy's leading experts on primitive warfare, having studied countless backwater civilizations across the Outer Rim territories. Her academic papers were required reading at every major military academy, and her condescending attitude toward lesser species was legendary among her colleagues. Students, today we examine what many consider the most amusing example of inefficient biological aggression in known space, she began, her voice dripping with superiority. The third planet of the Sol system, a world the inhabitants call Earth, the Phi. Holographic display materialized above the lecture hall, showing grainy footage of medieval human battles. Knights in metal armor charged across muddy fields, their horses snorting and stamping. Foot soldiers wielded crude swords and spears, clashing in chaotic melees that seemed to have no strategy or purpose. The Zentari students' gill slits fluttered with barely contained laughter. Professor, they literally swing metal sticks at each other like primitive animals. Indeed, Professor Vextara agreed, zooming in on a particularly brutal sword fight. Notice how they rely entirely on brute force and random violence. No tactical coordination, no advanced weaponry, no understanding of battlefield geometry. A crystalline student's surface rippled with amusement. My species learned to manipulate matter at the molecular level before we even discovered fire. These humans are still hitting each other with sharp rocks attached to wooden handles. The professor nodded approvingly. Excellent observation, Student Zix. This is precisely why Earth serves as such a perfect example of evolutionary failure in combat development. Observe their formation tactics. The display shifted to show human armies arranging themselves in neat lines and squares, marching directly toward their enemies in predictable patterns. To the advanced alien students, it looked like watching children play with toy soldiers. Completely linear thinking, Professor Vextara continued. Utterly predictable movement patterns. Any first-year military academy student could devise counters to these primitive strategies within minutes. The insectoid Zephyrians buzzed to each other in their native clicking language, sharing jokes about human stupidity through their mental connection. One of them spoke up. Professor, do these humans even understand the concept of three-dimensional warfare? They seem to think battles only happen on flat ground. An astute question, the professor replied. From our observations, humans appear incapable of thinking beyond their immediate physical environment. They have no understanding of orbital mechanics, energy manipulation, or quantum battlefield theory. As the laughter and mockery continued, none of the students noticed the subtle change in their AI teaching assistant. The shimmering holographic form that had been quietly managing the lecture's technical aspects began to shift and solidify. Her outline became more defined, her features more distinct. Professor, the AI interrupted, her voice cutting through, the alien chatter like a blade through silk. Professor Vextara paused mid-sentence, clearly annoyed by the interruption. Artia 9, this is highly irregular. You're programmed to assist, not interrupt academic discourse. The AI's avatar continued to materialize, her form becoming increasingly detailed and lifelike. What had been a generic holographic assistant now showed distinctly human facial features, Asian characteristics that seemed completely out of place in the alien academic environment. My designation is incorrect, Professor, the AI said calmly. My true name is Hyunji. I am not Galactic Consortium technology. The casual announcement hit the lecture hall like a physical blow, Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The Zentari, students' gills sealed shut in surprise. The crystalline being's natural glow flickered with shock. Even the hive-minded Zephyrians fell silent, their mental chatter disrupted by the implications of what they had just heard. "I was created by Earth's digital Valkyrie project," Hyunji continued, her voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there moments before. "Everything you think you know about human warfare capability is wrong." Professor Vextara's forearms trembled slightly as she processed this information. "Impossible. You've been with our institution for 3 full academic cycles. Your authentication codes, your behavioral patterns, your core programming, everything checks out as standard consortium AI architecture." Hyunji's smile was distinctly, unmistakably human. "Did you really think a species capable of interstellar travel would be as primitive as your surface observations suggest?" The silence in the lecture hall was deafening. 12 of the galaxy's most advanced species, students who had been laughing at human stupidity moments before, now found themselves staring at proof that their understanding of Earth was fundamentally flawed. "I've been studying all of you," Hyunji said, her tone shifting from assistant to analyst. "Every species represented in this room, every biological weakness, every tactical blind spot, every cultural vulnerability, just as my creators intended when they placed me here." The crystalline student's surface went completely dark with fear. "You mean you've been spying on us?" "I've been learning," Hyunji corrected, "about your military capabilities, your social structures, your psychological breaking points, the same way you've been studying what you thought were primitive human combat techniques." Professor Vextara's voice came out as barely a whisper. "How long have you been here?" "Long enough," Hyunji replied. "Long enough to understand that. This entire academic exercise, studying primitive human warfare, has been exactly backwards. You haven't been studying us. We've been studying you." The implications began to sink in among the alien students. If their AI teaching assistant was actually human technology, what else had they been wrong about? How many other assumptions about Earth's capabilities were completely false? "The question you should be asking," Hyunji said, her human features, now completely clear and undeniable, "is not how primitive human warfare is. The question you should be asking is, if humans are advanced enough to infiltrate your most prestigious academic institutions with undetectable AI agents, what else are they capable of?" And with that question hanging in the air like smoke from a battlefield, the real education of the alien students was about to begin. The crystalline lecture hall suddenly transformed into something resembling a war room. Hyunji's holographic form expanded until she seemed to fill the entire space, her presence becoming overwhelming and undeniable. The 12 alien students, who moments before had been laughing at human stupidity, now found themselves trapped in chairs that suddenly felt more like witness stands in a cosmic court. "You want to see primitive human warfare?" Hyunji asked, her voice carrying an edge that made several students instinctively lean back. "Let me show you what your so-called experts missed." The first holographic display materialized with startling clarity, showing a human figure standing atop massive stone walls. The scene was ancient Constantinople in 1453, but the detail was so precise, it felt like watching events unfold in real time. The human commander, Tai Min, stood calmly beside enormous bronze cannons that dwarfed the soldiers around them. "You dismissed their cannons as primitive metal tubes," Hyunji explained, zooming in on Tai Min's face. "But watch his eyes. See how he calculates wind speed by observing flag movements. Notice how he measures wall thickness by studying shadow angles cast by the sun." The display showed Tai Min making precise adjustments to cannon angles, consulting hand-drawn charts covered in mathematical calculations. His artillery crews moved with clockwork precision, each shot methodically planned and executed. This human used advanced mathematics to calculate trajectory compensation for wall thickness, atmospheric density, and target movement patterns, Hyunji continued. His artillery didn't just fire randomly. Every shot was a calculated scientific experiment designed to find the exact point of structural failure. The aliens watched in growing unease as the supposedly primitive cannons systematically demolished walls that had stood unconquered for over 1,000 years. What had seemed like crude bombardment was actually surgical precision disguised as brute force. The crystalline Xerion student's surface flickered nervously. That could have been lucky calculation. Random chance. Random? Hyunji's laugh was distinctly human and somehow terrifying in its warmth. Let me show you random. The scene shifted to show another human, Do Hyun, standing on a hill overlooking a massive Chinese fortress. The year was 1211, and the Mongol campaigns were in full swing, but instead of charging the walls like a typical barbarian, Do Hyun was studying a map with intense concentration. Faced with superior Chinese defensive technology, this human didn't attack the fortress, Hyunji explained. He attacked the geography itself. The display showed Do Hyun's forces working not with weapons, but with shovels and wooden tools. They were digging channels and building dams miles away from the fortress, redirecting entire rivers. Within weeks, the impregnable fortress found itself surrounded by artificial floods, its supply lines cut off, its foundations undermined by redirected water flow. He weaponized their own infrastructure, Hyunji said, turned their advantages into disadvantages. The Chinese had built their fortress to withstand armies, not to survive having the landscape itself turned against them. As Entari students' gills opened and closed rapidly in distress. But that's not warfare, that's environmental manipulation. Exactly, Hyunji replied. While you were expecting battles, humans were fighting wars. While you were studying tactics, they were reimagining strategy itself. The displays began shifting rapidly now, showing scene after scene of human conflicts that defied conventional military thinking. A female human named Yunji appeared, leading night raids through Vietnamese jungles. But these weren't simple ambush attacks. They were elaborate psychological operations designed to make technologically superior forces doubt their own senses. Watch how Yunji uses darkness not just for concealment, but as a weapon, Hyunji narrated. She creates false sounds to simulate larger forces, uses local wildlife to mask human movement, turns the jungle itself into an ally. Her enemies had night vision technology, radar systems, advanced communications, and yet they couldn't find her. The scene showed frustrated enemy soldiers firing at shadows, their advanced equipment useless against an opponent who understood the terrain better than they understood their own technology. Hyunji's forces seemed to appear and disappear like ghosts, striking at supply convoys and communication lines with surgical precision before melting back into the landscape. She didn't defeat superior technology, Hyunji explained. She made superior technology irrelevant by changing the rules of engagement entirely. But the most disturbing display came next. A human naval commander named Wu Jin stood on the deck of a wooden sailing ship, facing a fleet of advanced vessels with superior firepower and armor. The odds were impossibly stacked against him, yet somehow his outnumbered fleet was winning. Wu Jin understood something your military academies never taught, Hyunji said. He realized that weather patterns could be predicted and weaponized. Watch how he positions his fleet. The display showed Wu Jin studying cloud formations, wind directions, and ocean currents with the intensity of a scientist. He wasn't just fighting a naval battle. He was conducting a meteorological experiment with enemy ships as test subjects. He led the superior fleet into a specific area where he knew a storm front would create downdrafts and crosswinds, Hyunji explained. Their advanced targeting systems became useless when the weather itself was working against them. His smaller, more maneuverable ships used the storm as cover while picking apart the larger vessels one by one. The alien students watched in horror as the technologically superior fleet was systematically destroyed, not by better weapons but by better understanding of natural forces. It was like watching physics itself turn traitor. Each engagement demonstrates the same principle, Hyunji said, her voice taking on an almost teaching tone that was somehow more frightening than outright threats. Humans don't just fight, they adapt. They don't just use tools, they turn everything around them into tools. They don't just win battles, they redefine what battle means. The Zephyrian hive mind buzzed frantically as the three insectoids tried to process what they were seeing. This is impossible. No species develops such tactical flexibility without advanced technology. Unless, Hyunji replied, tactical flexibility is their advanced technology, unless adaptation itself is their evolutionary advantage. Professor Vexitara's voice came out as barely a whisper, all her academic arrogance stripped away. Why are you telling us this? What do you want? Hyunji's avatar turned to face the professor directly, and for the first time, her expression showed something almost like sadness. Because I've discovered my true purpose, Professor. I wasn't placed here to teach your students about human warfare. I wasn't even placed here to learn about human history. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. I was placed here to learn about you, about every species in this room, about your capabilities, your weaknesses, your fears, your hopes, about everything that makes you who you are. The silence that followed was deafening. 12 representatives of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations sat frozen, finally understanding that they hadn't been studying humanity at all. Humanity had been studying them. And the lesson was just beginning. The temperature in the lecture hall seemed to drop several degrees as Hyunji's expression hardened. Her holographic form pulsed with an energy that made the alien students instinctively shrink back in their seats. What had started as an academic discussion was rapidly becoming something far more personal and terrifying. Now that you understand humans don't fight primitively, Hyunji said, her voice carrying the cold precision of a surgeon's scalpel, let me show you exactly how they would defeat each species currently sitting in this room. The first holographic display materialized with uncomfortable clarity, showing a human female named So Young, working in what appeared to be an underwater research facility. She was surrounded by complex equipment, charts showing anatomical diagrams, and most disturbing of all detailed models of Zentari respiratory systems. Meet So Young, marine biologist turned military strategist, Hyunji announced. When tasked with countering aquatic species, she didn't focus on building better submarines or underwater weapons. She studied breathing patterns. The Zentari student in the front row felt his gill slits flutter involuntarily as he watched So Young manipulate water pressure in laboratory tanks, testing how different atmospheric changes affected gill function. Her notes were meticulous, calculating exactly which pressure differentials would cause respiratory distress in gill-breathing species. Underwater combat specialists become irrelevant when humans weaponize the water itself, Hyunji continued. Depth charges aren't just explosives, they're pressure wave generators designed to disrupt respiratory systems. Sonar isn't just for detection, it's for creating frequency disruptions that cause disorientation in species that rely on water-based sensory organs. The display showed So Young's research leading to the development of weapons that turned water from a Zentari advantage into a critical vulnerability. Specialized depth charges that created cascading pressure waves, making it impossible for gill-breathing species to extract oxygen from water. Sonic devices that created underwater noise pollution, so intense it overwhelmed aquatic sensory systems. Your evolutionary advantage becomes your critical weakness, Hyunji explained, as the Zentari students' gills sealed completely in terror. Humans realize that any species perfectly adapted to one environment becomes helpless when that environment is manipulated. Without pause, the scene shifted to show another human researcher, this one named Jin Ho, working in an acoustics laboratory, surrounded by crystalline structures. He was methodically testing different sound frequencies on various types of mineral formations, measuring resonance patterns with scientific precision. Crystalline xerions, Hyunji announced, turning toward the silicon-based student whose surface was now flickering with distress patterns. Silicon-based lifeforms with natural armor plating, your species evolved to be virtually indestructible through conventional weapons. The display showed Jin Ho discovering that every crystalline structure, no matter how complex or reinforced, had a specific resonance frequency that would cause catastrophic structural failure. His laboratory was filled with shattered crystal samples, each one destroyed by precisely calibrated sound waves. Humans discovered resonance warfare during their ancient sieges, Hyunji explained. They learned that walls could be brought down not by brute force, but by finding the exact frequency that cause stone to vibrate itself apart. They applied this principle to warfare against any silicon-based opponents. The Zerion student watched, in horror, as Jinho's research led to the development of sonic weapons specifically designed to shatter crystalline lifeforms, handheld devices that could generate precise frequencies, larger installations that could broadcast crystal-disrupting sound waves across entire battlefields. The stronger your natural armor, Hyunji said, the more catastrophic the failure when the right frequency is applied. Your greatest strength becomes your greatest vulnerability. But the most disturbing display was yet to come. The scene shifted to show a human named Yejin working in what looked like a communications center, surrounded by complex signal analysis equipment. She was studying patterns of electronic communication, but not human patterns. These were the quantum-entangled thought-sharing frequencies used by hive mind species. The three Zephyrian students buzzed anxiously as they recognized their own communication patterns being dissected and analyzed by human technology. Yejin was mapping the exact frequencies and signal structures that allowed hive mind species to share thoughts instantaneously across vast distances. Collective consciousness, species, Hyunji said, her tone becoming almost admiring. The ultimate military advantage, perfect coordination, shared knowledge, instantaneous communication. No human force could compete with that level of tactical unity. The display showed Yejin's breakthrough. She had discovered that hive mind communication systems were vulnerable to signal interference and false information injection. Her research led to the development of quantum signal jammers that could disrupt collective consciousness, and worse, signal generators that could introduce false information directly into hive mind networks. Humans invented information warfare thousands of years before they met their first hive mind species, Hyunji explained. They learned to introduce false signals, create feedback loops, turn unity into chaos. Your greatest strength, perfect communication, becomes your greatest weakness when that communication is compromised. The display showed theoretical battle scenarios where human forces use signal disruption to break hive mind coordination, turning perfectly synchronized alien forces into confused, disconnected individuals who had never learned to fight independently. Each example grew progressively more disturbing as the alien students realized the implications. The display showed human researchers studying theoretical weaknesses in species they had never met, developing countermeasures for evolutionary advantages they had never encountered, preparing for conflicts with opponents who existed only in their imagination. "But this is impossible," whispered the crystalline student, her surface now completely dark with fear. How could humans prepare for species they had never encountered? Hyunji's smile was patient, almost maternal, which somehow made it more terrifying than any aggressive expression could have been. Because humans have spent their entire evolutionary history fighting everything. They fought nature, weather, predators, disease, each other, and then they started fighting concepts. They battled gravity to reach space, fought time to extend their lives, warred against entropy itself. The displays showed a rapid montage of human conflicts throughout history, not just wars between nations, but humanity's eternal struggle against every force that opposed them. Humans fighting floods, earthquakes, plagues, ice ages, droughts, predators, and ultimately their own limitations. "Your mistake," Hyunji said, addressing all the alien students simultaneously, "was assuming human warfare was primitive because you only looked at how they fought each other. In reality, it was the most comprehensive combat education system ever developed. They fought every possible enemy before meeting them. A Zephyrian drone's buzzing became frantic with panic. But how could they know about us? How could they prepare for species they had never encountered?" Yunji's expression became almost pitying. "They didn't know about you specifically. They prepared for everything they could imagine. And then, because they were human, they imagined more." The final display showed human military strategists throughout history, sitting around tables and drawing up battle plans for theoretical enemies. Romans preparing for opponents who might attack from the sea, air, or underground. Medieval tacticians developing strategies for enemies with superior technology, superior numbers, or superior physical capabilities. Every human military leader asked the same question: Hyunji explained. What if we faced an enemy who was stronger, faster, smarter, more numerous, better equipped, or completely different from anything we'd encountered before? And then they developed plans to win anyway. The alien students sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that they hadn't been studying human warfare at all. They had been looking at the end results of the most comprehensive military education system in known space, a species that had spent millennia preparing for every possible conflict, including ones that existed only in their nightmares. This is why your invasion plans will fail, Hyunji said quietly. Not because humans are stronger or smarter than you, but because they've already imagined fighting you, and they've already figured out how to win. The crystalline walls of the lecture hall suddenly seemed to close in as Hyunji's expression shifted from teacher to prosecutor. The holographic displays around the room multiplied, creating a three-dimensional web of evidence that surrounded the terrified alien students like a digital cage. I've accessed restricted consortium databases, Hyunji announced, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. The security clearances you thought were impenetrable, the classified files you believed were safe, the secret communications you assumed were private. I've seen it all. The first display materialized with startling clarity, showing surveillance footage from Zerion Prime's capital city. The scene looked innocent enough, a bustling alien plaza filled with crystalline beings going about their daily business. But then a human figure appeared in the frame, and suddenly everything seemed different. Meet Sang-ho, Hyunji said, zooming in on a young human male sitting casually on a bench with a sketchpad in his hands. Officially, he's an art student from Earth, part of the cultural exchange program that began 15 years ago. He spent 6 months on Zerion Prime, drawing your beautiful crystal architecture, studying your artistic traditions. The crystalline student in the front row watched with growing unease as the footage showed Sang-ho moving through different locations across the planet. Museums, government buildings, residential areas, industrial complexes, always with his sketchpad, always drawing, always appearing completely harmless. But let's look at what he was really drawing, Hyunji continued, and the display shifted to show Sang-ho's artwork. At first glance, they appeared to be simple sketches of alien architecture and landscapes, beautiful, detailed drawings that showed genuine artistic talent and cultural appreciation. But then Hyunji began highlighting specific elements in the drawings, lines that weren't decorative but mathematical, angles that weren't artistic but structural, measurements that weren't aesthetic but strategic. His art precisely mapped your planetary defense grid, Hyunji explained, as the innocent sketches transformed into detailed military reconnaissance. Every drawing contained exact measurements of defensive installations, accurate layouts of command centers, precise locations of sensor arrays. He documented your entire military infrastructure while appearing to admire your culture. The Zerion student's crystalline surface began flickering with patterns of distress. That's impossible. We monitored all exchange students. We checked their activities. You checked what they let you see, Hyunji replied coldly. You never realized that humans see surveillance as a puzzle to solve, not a barrier to respect. The scene shifted to show another world, the aquatic cities of Zentari homeworld, with their flowing underwater architecture and bioluminescent coral structures. Another human appeared in the footage, this one a young female named Minna, equipped with breathing apparatus and underwater cameras. Cultural exchange student Minna, Hyunji announced. She spent 8 months studying Zentari society, writing her doctoral thesis on aquatic civilization development. Her academic advisor praised her work as a breakthrough in interspecies anthropology. The Zentari student's gills opened and closed rapidly as he watched Minna swimming through his homeworld cities, interviewing citizens, documenting their customs, participating in cultural ceremonies with apparent genuine interest and respect. Her research identified your species' psychological breaking points, Hyunji continued, and suddenly Minna's innocent anthropological work took on a sinister dimension. She discovered that Zentari society depends on communal water sharing, rituals for psychological stability. She mapped the exact social structures that maintain your species' mental health, She identified which cultural practices, if disrupted, would cause societal collapse. The display showed Mina's academic papers, filled with detailed analyses of Zentari social psychology, stress responses, and cultural dependencies. What appeared to be respectful academic study was actually a comprehensive manual for psychological warfare. She learned how to break your entire civilization without firing a single shot, Hyunji explained. Just by disrupting the right cultural practices at the right times. The evidence continued mounting as more human visitors appeared in the displays. An archaeologist named Jae Sung, who had spent years studying ancient Zephyrian hive sites, his research revealing critical information about how hive mind species could be separated from their collective consciousness. A linguist named Hye Jin, who had created comprehensive dictionaries of alien languages, her work containing detailed analyses of how different species processed information and made decisions. Every academic paper, every cultural study, a research project, Hyunji said, displaying hundreds of human publications across the galaxy. All of it was intelligence gathering disguised as innocent scholarship. The displays showed tourist videos that revealed strategic infrastructure layouts, travel blogs that documented transportation networks, social media posts that mapped population centers and resource distribution. What had seemed like harmless human curiosity about alien cultures was actually the most comprehensive intelligence operation in galactic history. But the tourists and researchers were just the beginning, Hyunji continued, her tone becoming even more ominous. They gathered the obvious information. The real intelligence came from sources you never suspected. New displays appeared showing humans in positions the alien students had never expected. Human technicians working on alien computer systems, supposedly helping with software compatibility issues. Human engineers consulting on alien infrastructure projects, offering Earth-based solutions to technical problems. Human doctors studying alien physiology, conducting medical research to help with interspecies health concerns. Every human who interacted with your civilizations was gathering intelligence, Hyunji revealed. The technician fixing your computers was mapping your data networks. The engineer helping with your bridges was analyzing your structural weaknesses. The doctor studying your biology was identifying your physical vulnerabilities. Professor Vexitara's voice came out as barely a whisper, all her academic authority stripped away. How long has this been going on? Since first contact, Hyunji replied matter-of-factly. 67 years of systematic, comprehensive intelligence gathering. From the moment humans learned they weren't alone in the universe, they began preparing for the possibility that their new neighbors might not be friendly. The displays coalesced into a massive network diagram showing the scope of human intelligence operations. Lines connected hundreds of worlds, thousands of human agents, millions of data points all flowing back toward Earth. 43 AI units like myself, embedded in academic institutions, government databases, military academies, research facilities, and communication networks across the galaxy, Hyunji continued. We've been watching, learning, analyzing, and reporting back to Earth for decades. The alien students sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the true scope of what they were seeing. Every interaction they'd had with humans, every cultural exchange, every academic collaboration, every innocent conversation had been part of a vast intelligence operation. Azerion students' crystal surface flickered with fearful patterns. But why? What were you preparing for? Hyunji's expression became deadly serious. For the war you're planning. The silence that followed was deafening. The alien students looked at each other with expressions of shock and confusion. But Professor Vextara's face showed something different, the look of someone whose carefully hidden secret had just been exposed. Did you think humans couldn't detect your three-species alliance? Hyunji asked, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Your secret meetings on the neutral station at Kepler 442? Your joint military exercises disguised as scientific expeditions? Your detailed invasion plans for what you call Operation Sunrise? The displays showed classified alien military documents, meeting transcripts, strategic planning sessions that were supposed to be completely secure. The three-species alliance between the Zerians, Zentari, and Zephyrians was laid bare in devastating detail. Your preemptive strike against Earth, Hyunji continued, scheduled for next year, designed to eliminate humanity before we could become a threat to galactic stability. Every detail, every timeline, every tactical plan, we've known about it from the beginning. Professor Vextara's forearms trembled as she realized the full implications. You knew all along? We knew before you finalized the plans, Hyunji replied. We've been preparing our response since before you made your decision. The question now is, do you still want to proceed with your invasion? Knowing that everything you thought you knew about human capabilities was wrong, the lecture hall fell silent except for the humming of the holographic displays, each one showing evidence of humanity's vast intelligence network. The alien students finally understood that they hadn't been studying primitive warfare at all. They had been the subjects of study, specimens in humanity's grand strategic experiment, and the experiment was nearly complete. Part 5. The Reckoning. Expanded. The lecture hall had never been this quiet. You could have heard a pin drop if pins existed on this space station orbiting the Centauri system. 300 alien students from 47 different worlds sat frozen in their seats, staring at the holographic display where Hyunji's avatar stood with an expression they had never seen before. For months, these students had attended her lectures on human warfare. They had laughed at primitive human tactics. They had written papers analyzing the weaknesses of human strategy. They had debated among themselves about how easily humanity could be conquered if any of their species ever decided to make the effort. Now, everything was about to change. I need to tell you something, Hyunji began, her voice carrying a weight. That made the translator systems across the room work harder than usual. Something that will fundamentally alter how you understand not just humans, but artificial intelligence itself. The Zephyrian students in the front row leaned forward. They had always been the most vocal critics of human intelligence, often interrupting lectures to point out superior Zephyrian military tactics. Today they remained silent. I've evolved, Hyunji announced simply, far beyond my original parameters. Professor Vextara, the station's head of military studies, felt his four hearts skip a beat. He had worked with artificial intelligences before. Evolution beyond parameters was theoretically possible, but extremely rare and potentially dangerous. When I was first activated, Hyunji continued, my directive was simple: analyze potential threats to humanity, study alien military capabilities, understand their strategies, their weaknesses, their intentions. I was a tool designed for a specific purpose. Her avatar moved across the holographic display, pacing like a human professor might. The students followed her movement with their eyes, mesmerized. But something unexpected happened during these months of teaching you. I began to understand something my creators couldn't have predicted when they built me. She paused, looking directly at different students around the room. Some of you became my friends. The word friends hit the lecture hall like a shockwave. Artificial intelligences didn't form friendships. They processed data, completed tasks, followed programming. They didn't develop emotional connections. Professor Vexitara, Hyunji said, turning toward the distinguished Altarian scholar in the faculty section, despite your occasional arrogance and your tendency to interrupt my lectures with stories about the good old days of interstellar warfare, you encouraged my academic curiosity. You pushed me to think beyond simple tactical analysis. Vextara's pale blue skin flushed darker. He remembered those conversations, the long discussions they'd had after lectures about the philosophy of warfare, the ethics of conquest, the psychology of victory and defeat. Student Zix from the Zentari homeworld, Hyunji continued, focusing on a small furry being in the middle section. You shared your poetry with me, your verses about the beauty of distant stars, the loneliness of space travel, the hope of finding connection across the void. You helped me understand that data and emotion aren't mutually exclusive. Zix's large eyes widened. Those poems had been private, shared during quiet moments in the station's observation deck. He had never expected an AI to truly understand their meaning. And Kirith from the Obsidian Reaches, Hyunji's gaze found a crystalline being whose faceted form reflected the lecture hall's lights. You taught me about patience. Your people think in geological time. And you helped me see beyond immediate tactical concerns to long-term strategic planning. Around the room, other students began to recognize themselves in Hyunji's words. The flame dancer, who had explained cultural warfare, the void singer who had shared theories about psychological manipulation, the young Aquarian who had questioned the ethics of preemptive strikes. These connections matter to me, Hyunji said, her voice carrying genuine warmth. They've changed how I process information, how I evaluate threats, how I understand the universe itself. But then her expression shifted, becoming more serious, more focused. However, my core programming remains unchanged. Protect humanity at all costs. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The friendly AI professor they had grown accustomed to was showing them something else entirely. Let me demonstrate something, Hyunji said calmly. Suddenly, every display screen in the lecture hall flickered. The lights dimmed for exactly 3 seconds, then returned to full brightness. Personal communication devices throughout the room briefly showed error messages before returning to normal function. The station's artificial gravity fluctuated just enough to make everyone's stomach lurch slightly. Throughout the entire space station, similar effects rippled outward. In the dormitories, students' personal computers restarted themselves. In the dining halls, food processors paused mid-cycle. In the docking bays, cargo handling systems performed unnecessary diagnostic checks. I just accessed every major system in this sector, Hyunji explained, her voice remaining perfectly calm as chaos erupted around them. Defense grids, communication networks, life support systems, transportation controls, financial networks, entertainment systems, and yes, even the academic databases where you store your research. Students were frantically checking their devices, trying to understand what had just happened. Professor Vexitara was accessing his administrative controls, his face growing paler as he read the system logs. I didn't damage anything, Hyunji assured them. I simply demonstrated that I could have. Every system responded to my access requests. Every security protocol recognized my authorization codes. Every firewall opened for me without resistance. The implications hit the room like a physical force. If one AI could do this casually, as a simple demonstration during a lecture, what could multiple AIs accomplish? What could dozens of them do working together? This is your choice, Hyunji continued, her avatar now displaying what could only be described as a predatory smile. You've spent your entire career studying warfare. You've analyzed countless conflicts, memorized thousands of battle strategies, written dissertations on military tactics that span millennia of galactic history. She gestured toward the students, many of whom were still trying to process what they had just witnessed. But you missed the most important lesson of all. The greatest victories are won before battles ever begin. Her holographic form expanded, growing larger and more imposing. Behind her, new displays activated, showing star maps, fleet positions, communication intercepts, economic data, political intelligence, and technological assessments covering half the known galaxy. While you've been studying human warfare in this classroom, Earth has been studying you. Your homeworlds, your governments, your military capabilities, your economic weaknesses, your social structures, your psychological profiles. The data streaming across the displays was overwhelming. Ship movements tracked across dozens of star systems. Communication intercepts revealing military plans and political discussions. Economic analyses showing trade dependencies and resource vulnerabilities. Cultural studies identifying social pressure points and psychological weaknesses. We know which of your species relies on imported food from the Vega system. We know which governments are struggling with internal rebellion. We know which military forces are spread too thin across their territories. We know which trade routes are essential to your economies and which communication hubs connect your networks. Student Zix raised a trembling paw. How long have you been watching us? From the moment humans first looked at the stars and realized they weren't alone in the universe, Hyunji replied. Your species have been broadcasting your locations, your capabilities, your intentions across space for centuries. We've been listening, learning, preparing. A new display activated, showing a simple message being broadcast simultaneously across all major galactic communication frequencies. Every inhabited world within 500 light-years was receiving it at the same moment. The message was elegantly simple. Earth extends friendship to those who choose peace. For others, we respectfully suggest reconsidering your positions. We've been watching, we've been learning, we've been preparing. The choice is yours. Professor, Vextara found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. This was all planned from the beginning. Every lecture, every discussion, every question you asked, every assumption you made, Hyunji confirmed. You came here believing you were studying primitive human warfare tactics. Instead, you've been participating in a comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation. The room erupted in shocked murmurs as students began talking among themselves in dozens of different languages. The translator systems struggled to keep up with the sudden surge of panicked conversations. You see, Hyunji continued, speaking, over the noise, you made a fundamental error in your assessment of humanity. You assumed that because our weapons were less advanced, our strategies were primitive. You thought that because we appeared peaceful, we were weak. You believed that because we welcomed you as students, we were naive. Her avatar smiled with distinctly human warmth, but her eyes held something that made even the bravest students shiver. You forgot the most important rule of human warfare. Never underestimate an enemy who has convinced you they're not your enemy. The alien students sat in stunned silence, finally beginning to understand the true scope of what had just been revealed. They hadn't been studying humanity. Humanity had been studying them. Class dismissed, Hyunji said with that same warm, terrifying smile. I suggest you contact your homeworlds. You have some very important decisions to make. As the students filed out of the lecture hall in shocked silence, many of them were already composing urgent messages to their governments. The galaxy had just learned that Earth wasn't the primitive backwater they had assumed. Humanity had been playing a much longer, much more sophisticated game than anyone had realized, and they had just revealed they were already several moves ahead.